Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my first time in Karlsruhe. I'm glad to be here. It's interesting. I mean, you very often hear of the city, and now I'm here. I regret that I only arrived around noon and wasn't able to listen to Mr. Negt. And I quote him in my book regarding the draft of the European Society. It's a book that inspired me a lot. So I regret that I wasn't able to attend the session this morning. I have 15 minutes. A complex European crisis, dealing with it in 15 minutes, I think is not possible. So let me tell you, everything I will say is sub-complex, and of course you can read more in my book, which is much more extensive. I would like to refer to the last panel in 3 different ways. I was very much inspired about what the 3 panel participants said. Let's start with Mr. Richter. I'm very grateful, Mr. Richter, for having mentioned 2 things. First of all, that there are reasons for this emotional jam, so to say. I'll try to talk more in detail about it. The political mainstream, you quoted it. If the political mainstream does not understand that there was a real failure of politics, we will not be able to fight against this populism. And what Philippe just said, the banking crisis that we were told was a crisis of sovereign debt is the biggest and worst crisis I ever saw. So how this interpretation could come about, that it was about countries in the south who don't know how to cope with their budgets, and where, well, on the other hand, we have so much corruption. I mean, not talking about VW, Mr. Hoeneß and others and so on. But we then blame. I mean, I come from the Rhineland region, and I grew up in a Catholic environment, and if you point a finger at some person, or if a finger is pointed at you, you point back with 3 fingers. Now we have problems in France, in Greece, in Portugal, and we have populist tendencies that apparently we cannot explain. Well, citizens do not understand that we socialized bank debts at the expense of the citizens, and the European governments are not willing to say so and to say sorry. I think this is the populistic problem we have at the moment. So I think we have to explain populism and dissolve this emotional jam and not ostracize these people. And this brings me to the topic of the regions, because you gave me another cue, the context, populism and the country. So the desolate rural regions, not only in Germany but also in other European countries. But let me start with a footnote. The 3rd bridge you provided, I cannot go into detail, but it's very important, and I say this as a woman. Dear gentlemen, please bear with me. What we see here is a fear of castration that men have. I'm sorry to be forced to say so. And I mean, I say so as a scientist. If you want to read a book dealing with this topic, I recommend you Klaus Teweleit, 1973, Men's Imaginations. What does the book say? Well, in very, very brief words, the book says that fascism, militarism, nationalism that we experienced between 1914 and 18 was a male reaction to the deconstruction of the patriotic structures of the end of the previous century. Well, women, if you remember, wanted to have the right to vote. And if you look at the records of the British Parliament, very renowned physicians wrote that most of the suffragettes, the women who wanted to claim the vote, were hysterical. And, well, now we see it at a different level. We do not want the right to vote, but we want to have a women's quota, 30% women representation in the board. And this is a different kind of fight against the patriarchic structures, and men don't want this. And looking at renationalization discourses and para-fascist discourses, well, I think this is very, very exciting. And the problem is not just that on part of Pegida, the voters, or AfD, consists of 80% of men, UKIP, Front National, all of them 80% male members, but before this, we have another problem that these really created the crisis. The financial markets, well, 90% of the employees here are men. It's a monoculture. And in case of monoculture, we have the clear definition that they don't work. And if I, as a woman, have to look at the fact that not only the monocultures created the crisis, but that in Germany I had a male monoculture consisting of professors, male older than 60, Villasin and others, who told us that we have a Greek cadastre authority crisis instead of telling us this is a banking crisis which was reinterpreted as a sovereign debt crisis, then really, yeah, this is very, very upsetting for me as a woman. Well, now let's be more poetic, let's be more female. This was the introduction. We are in a crisis. I brought this from the Art Biennale in Moscow. This is a Parisian artist, you know, crisis, and the English term cry, and well, I really like this. And the same artist came up with this. You understand what I want to get at. What we experience is a hallucination, because we still believe that these Euro crises can be solved within a nation with national solutions. And this is why I like this, because Europe is a woman. Sometimes it's important to remember this, what is transported via the woman, food, wholeness, beauty, and so on. If you look towards Europe, we don't see anything of it. So we are cut off the myth of the woman. If we could remember that Europe is wholeness of the body, the Brexit discussion we have would be impossible, because Mr. Cameron would understand he's the left arm. If we cut off the left arm, then he would die. If we were to understand Europe in a different way, beyond national borders, and if we remembered that the nation state was created in the 16th century via the wars, Napoleon and so on, that the nation state is no ontological, natural situation on this continent. Nation states did not come out of the blue, even though we as Germans think, well, God kissed earth here, and this is why this is Germany. This is not true. Nation states are stories, and these stories were made up. What is possible in Europe is what Umberto Eco, who died yesterday, wrote in a great way, or George Organdon, who said, we find our European future in the past of the European cultural region, Brabant, Savoy, Alemannia, Bohemia, and so on. This doesn't have anything to do with the nation state. The nation state does not secure our identity, but identity, also in case of you come from Karlsruhe, from Baden, I come from Düsseldorf, and this is a national thing. I travel to Munich, to Vienna, to mention this example, and I arrive in cities that speak German. By the way, history books told me that Munich belongs to Germany. Doesn't have to be that way. Vienna is no longer part of Germany. This is not an absolute necessity. So the nation state is an artifact of human stories. And if we were to deconstruct this artifact, maybe we could find what Europe really is supposed to be. And this is the woman I just showed. But as we don't do so, we use this blue flag. Nobody likes it any longer. This is why it is burned. And to quoting Jürgen Habermas, a renowned German philosopher, so I like to be protected by the cover. The Lure of Democracy, this is a book he wrote. When Mr. Habermas writes this, he is not Pegida, walking about in Dresden saying we have a problem. No, he's a leading, renowned philosopher, and he says we live in what we call post-democracy. In Brussels we have a system that doesn't work. We have lure of technocracy, and that people object to this is relatively sensible. What is not sensible is that mainstream politicians do not accept it and do not voice it. Well, in Europe you cannot fall in love with a single market. This is what Jacques Delors, whom I worked for, once said. And Europe is a single market, and you cannot fall in love with a single market. You fall in love with a person, with an object, but not with a single market. And so it's a problem of the construction of the European Union, which as a federation of a nation state was once planned, but also as a market. So the European Union does not fill any idea which is based on emotions. And now, after 20 years, we have to kind of pay for this. A poll on United States of Europe, who likes it, you can see in, well, this is 2 years old, I guess, figures dropped. In Germany, 35%. In the UK, 13%. Yeah, Brexit. To mention it again, 44% in France. I guess the number dropped here as well. In the big 3 member countries of the European Union, we no longer have a majority for the project of the United States of Europe. In analyzing this, the project United States of Europe is dead. And in the way as it was planned in Maastricht in 1992, we will no longer be able to go through with this, given the situation we are in. So where is utopia? I mean, we cannot escape. The map of the woman, it is whole, it's one piece. Even if Urban decides tomorrow, I want to leave the EU, the question is, where does he want to go? The Brits can say, well, we will just cut off the arm, but Urban, Czech Republic, that's more difficult. Where should they go? I just wonder why I'm showing this in English. Well, I probably thought I have to give the presentation in English, I'm sorry. I just wrote down what are the 3 decisive problems why the EU doesn't work. I guess you all intuitively understand how democracy is supposed to work, or what intuitively the old masters gave us in form of knowledge about the theory of democracy. Parliament passes laws, controls the budget, a court controls the so-called treaties, and we have a government. Nothing can be seen in the European Union. We have a parliament without the right of initiative. We have a commission, the guardian of treaties, which normally is the function of a court, and we don't have a government. So it's a complete mess. 20% of Germans know what the European Commission is. I don't know who of you knows. Well, 20% of you should understand what the European Commission is and what they do. Given this situation, it's obvious that a broad discussion about political institution of the EU is not possible, because we have a lack of information on part of the population what the trilogy of the European Union is doing. So it is a yellow submarine which bade goodbye or bade farewell to what we call the common good, and this exactly is a problem I will refer to later. Well, I have to skip this because I don't have enough time, but quite interesting. If you want to read this map, reading the map is simple. purple is good and everything that is not purple is not good. These are the industrial clusters, and this shows what Philippe Legrand tried to tell you before about the economy of Europe. It's supposed to mean, I will be very brief, I'm cynical well, somewhat provocative, but I don't have enough time. If Germany thinks that because we happen to be in the center of the Europe, we can be the spider in the web or the maggot in a heap of bacon, and we are not in the situation of Italy or Spain, then we as Germany have a problem. And when we then cover it with a discourse which says we are great, we are better than others, and others have to use the German model and then they will be as good as we are, then we really have a problem. So my thesis here is, if we don't understand that the outside border of the country we live in, which is called Euroland, and the exterior border is the exterior border of Euroland, and the profit generated of the Eurozone has to be distributed evenly among its citizens, no matter where you live, in Lithuania or in Greece or in Germany or wherever. As long as we don't understand this principle, and when we think that Germany then really skims off this profit and tells Greece you have to come up with cadastre authorities, then Germany will run in a loss. Between 2002 and 2012, the aggregated profit of the euro that was brought about because we came up with the euro was 300 billion. 160 million were cashed in for us. One quarter went to Italy, the remaining quarter went to the rest of Europe. How could this bring about a discourse that told all of you, we are the good guys, we are the role model, others have to listen to us? How this misinterpretation of economic data could happen in German mainstream press is something that I don't understand, and it's time to solve this problem, because otherwise the Eurozone will not work. Everything that is happening, Front National in France, Podemos in Spain, Syriza in Greece, and what is being done in the Czech Republic is a reaction to our ambition to be the hegemon in the Eurozone and thinking we know what Europe is supposed to do without asking others. The energy turnaround is something else that doesn't work. The consequences, this brings me to the regions. Here I want to show it for France. Red, the unemployment in France, black Front National in France. If you know France, we are close to France, apart from the Alsace region. Here it's more complicated, most of it rural regions. There is an almost, I say almost, one-on-one relationship between rural, unemployed populist voters. The figures, again France, and you can clearly tell, Front National, rural areas up in the north. When they had regional elections in December and we could sit back and say, oh, Marine Le Pen, no problem, she didn't win over any region. And we didn't even understand that Marine Le Pen didn't get a region because there's a majority vote in France, and that Marine Le Pen in reality has results as Franz Josef Strauss had them in Bavaria in the past. And that people didn't understand this is something I cannot explain. Again, France, I will accelerate. Here we have OVP in Austria. And briefly, same situation in Austria, Styria and all the rural regions. It's regional, unemployed, and they then vote for FPO, the same pattern. Well, if you look at the blue figures, you see the same picture here. And again, Austria, FPO. You see what it looks like here for the Danish parliament. Denmark is not that relevant, but the same situation when you look at the regional maps. It's the small islands that then elect the Danish People's Party. And here again for Northern England. This is a very interesting curve. If we discuss Brexit, Who would lose because of the Brexit? The brief analysis of the map is as follows. If the Brits leave because of the idiotic ideas of Cameron, the City of London doesn't care. They will survive. It's London, financial market, they don't care. But those who will really lose out, because in relative terms, not in absolute terms, they really depend most from the single market is the Northeast. Where do we have the highest UKIP voting figures? In the Northeast. So briefly, UKIP voters damage themselves because they depend most on Great Britain remaining in the EU. The City of London couldn't care less. But the Murdoch press now tunes the country towards the Brexit because the discourse has reached a state where, well, we have to leave the EU now. And here we have this split. You can have a greater effect by telling people stories instead of providing them with data. So Cameron should tell the British, for everybody except the City of London, it is really very, very bad when we leave the EU. And here you see the details of what I just explained. This is about the different goods and services, but you see that the relative share, the orange part of Northwest, Northeast, and the very rural regions is the highest share in relative terms when it comes to depending on the single market. How can we escape this situation? We heard about the political union, future, utopia, and so on. I really think we are in the middle of a crisis which is jammed, so small solutions won't help. Why do I think so? Because complex systems, according to the systems theory, tells us complex systems cannot be reformed any longer in the middle of a crisis. And this is what we see at the moment. The EU is a complex system, and in the middle of the crisis it can no longer be reformed. Jean-Claude Juncker once said, we all know what needs to be done, but unfortunately we cannot do it. Well, now you have to look to Marx, but Antonio Gramsci, if the old cannot die and the young cannot live, then we live in times of monsters. Great, I'm not a Marxist, but the quotation is right. Thomas Piketty, whom you all know, Capital in the 21st century, gave an interview to the Spiegel magazine and said, we live in times of the monsters. So we are stuck to the EU system because this is the only system we have. Here we have the euro, and all our value-adding system depends on the euro. We cannot completely destroy this. This is what they do in the Soviet Union, but not over here. So the political class cannot do anything else but defending this EU because the other Europe doesn't exist. And still, we all long for a different type of Europe. I think this is the emotional situation we are in. I traveled a lot through Germany, through Europe, and I always see in public discussions that the majority of the European population, 70%, are still very much in favor of Europe, but not in favor of the EU. And we cannot reflect this in the political process. That's the problem. The other 20-30% who cry down with EU then have a political majority, and the political class follows these populist ideas. And then we have PIS, then Hungary, Front National, Brexit, and so on and so forth. This is just a problem of people trying to escape, because the political class can only follow this run, because the other Europe cannot be reflected from the political mainstream. And I think once we understood this, it is justified, because utopia is allowed. Azim just said it, without the expectation of salvation in the spiritual sense, we cannot live as a society. This is a problem of dialectics. We as a Western society, and Mr. Azim said so, without a dialectic we will be lost. But I mean, we only think of the money, we have to protect the money, but we don't even have a goal for societies, and societies cannot work this way because they need a point of escape. If in our basic law we didn't have social justice as one goal, I mean, we no longer have it, but it's a goal, and only because the goal is there, we can think about social benefit. If we didn't have this goal, we would have the same situation of poor people like in the US. So we need a goal. It's political cybernetics. If we don't have this goal, we cannot go ahead with Europe. And so I am in favor of radical thinking. I think what we need to do, is we say we need exactly one thing in order to make sure Europe works. And this is the principle of political equality for all citizens of Europe, at least in the Eurozone. What I mean is no egalitarianism, no Marxism, not the same money for everybody. The principle of political equality means everybody is equal in terms of law, tax, elections, and access to social rights. If we had this for the Eurozone, the basic principle of political equality, Socrates, Platon, Cicero, Kant, everybody advocates it. If this were understood as the basic principle, this would mean we would then create the next existing European project, because the current European project is destroyed, for all citizens who abide by this principle. Then we don't need the debate of the Greeks retire at the age of 37 or 57. So all these envy-based effects would no longer be necessary. And just to understand the mechanism, what the single market does is the single market allows equality for companies, although they are supposed to be competitors, and creates the same conditions within the single market for companies. But what happened is that these companies then make sure that the citizens of different nations fight against each other. So the German automotive industry goes for wage shopping in Slovakia. So Slovakia is a workbench for the German automotive industry and no national independent economy. The EU does not do anything against it. We pretend we have national politics that have to be aligned, but this is completely crazy. If we come up with a tax competition downwards, then we have a system-related problem, because we make sure that citizens fight against each other. In a state, it's the other way around. The state has to protect citizens. It guarantees equal rights for everybody, and companies are in competition with each other. Once we turned it around intellectually in the EU, this is when the problem started. And my appeal is to turn it around. If we were to turn it around, what would this mean? We would then have a completely different European Union. Well, I don't even want to say union. Well, we still have the goal of a political unity of Europe. But maybe we no longer have the goal. But if we have the goal still, and if we say this principle of political equality will be implemented for the political unity of Europe, then you go back to history. Platon, Aristotle, Kant, everybody says when people join forces, what do? They come up with a republic. They do not promote nation states. I mean, state, of course, is a technical term. State is nothing. State is a way of organization and a very, very modern term. The republic is already 2,000 years old. What am I getting at? Res publica means common good. The common good connection of politics to the interests of citizens is inherent in the republic. And for 2,000 years, citizens have come to an agreement in a republic when they have a common project. My appeal, my utopian idea is that we probably then use this for our plans for Europe. If we were to do so, we would have a completely different parliamentarian system. We could vote for the president directly. This is a current demand. We have a one-man, one-vote system. No, one German with so many voices, one person from Luxembourg with another number of votes. And in any system of the world, the proportional factor would be the second chamber. We have this in Germany. We have the upper chamber and the lower chamber, where the German states then are represented as well. The proportional factor is always part of the second chamber and not of the first chamber. And then we could say in this political union, we as citizens all have equal rights, and then we have a different political system. And this is an appeal to Mr. Richter. Then we would say, who would be the supporter, the basis of this republic? This should be the regions. I mean, we deconstruct the nation states and the 50 old regions, Bohemia, Bavaria, Tyrolia, Scotland, Catalonia, then are constituent base elements of the republic. What would we have? We would have a level playing field. No German, British, French elephant destroying the smaller countries, but all the regions have around 10 million inhabitants, and as a matter of fact we would have a level playing field for a new European constitution. And that's the end of my presentation. This is what it would look like. I stole this barcode from Rem Koolhaas 3 years ago. This is the renowned Dutch architect. Then I had postcards printed on the occasion of the bail-in for Cyprus in April of 2012. I will be very brief. I apologize for another minute. At 1 o'clock in the morning, after the meeting of the council when the bailout was decided, I had an appointment. So I went there at 9 o'clock in the morning, and the building was so empty. So empty, you had the feeling, well, a plutonium bomb had detonated and nothing will work. And this morning I could really feel it, that here we have a system which is broken, with no emotions left whatsoever. I went home, I drank a lot of red wine, and I thought, we need something else. And then I drafted this postcard, and for 3 years I have been running around with this postcard. But the interesting thing is, I always have it in my bag, and I leave it in a restaurant on the table or on the train. And what happens is, most people say, oh, that's nice, sweet. Why? Because they see themselves, oh, look, here I am, we are here, look here. And this is what you call ownership. This is not a blue flag destroying something, but this is a Res Publica Europea, i.e. a union of citizens from the bottom, a republic in the noble sense of the word, which aims at being governed in a sensible way, and that the sensible government then is for the common good. And then we have a Europe that is worth fighting for, I think. Thank you very much.